From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you very much for watching. And to Chris Kenny, it's my last chance to look down the camera and say what I say to him privately. I love that man. He's a fabulous part of what we do here at Sky News. We are the better for him being here, and I ask you to support him the same way that you support me. All the best to you and your family, mate. You're a very good man. All right, now let's talk about what's been happening in North Queensland. We've been looking up to what was going to happen with Cyclone Jasper. Now, of course, it is in the rearview mirror, but that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of damage. Thankfully, things maybe not as bad as we thought when it came to the wind, but geez, the rain. There's been an awful lot of it in the past little while. In fact, here's the latest stats from the Bureau of Meteorology, or BOM, as us bogans call it.
The highest wind speeds that were recorded were at Low Isles, so just off the coast, and that was 115 kilometres per hour. But we saw a number of communities seeing strong, persistent winds that caused impacts. We've seen widespread rainfall from this system, so a lot of catchments and a lot of locations have seen over 200 millimetres. We are still seeing this rainfall, and we could still see impacts from flooding.
Now, as for the locals and what they've been having to deal with for the past little while, it has been very difficult. In a moment or two's time, we'll have a chat to some of the local officials. But again, strength and love to the families that are dealing with this, and the flooding that has taken place. Obviously, places a little further away than the main centres of Cairns and Port Douglas are going to be the major problem. We'll check in with those people in a couple of days. But strength and love to everyone watching us right now in Queensland, particularly on Sky News Regional.
It's just made an absolute mess, and we've still got round two to come.
This is not what I expected to get visiting. Yeah, definitely. It's very wet and windy.
So I was actually just come down to try and catch a barra, but lost a lure in a tree.
Lived here for a long time, and this is as big as it gets.
The rain hurts us when it hits us. It's so strong.
Where are you guys from? Where are you from? Denmark.
We're not used to this.
Looks like the cyclone has claimed its first victim.
I came here to go snorkeling and to shop.
Now we've got to try and rebuild on getting tills back, and let alone assess the damage that the cyclone's going to leave behind.
They've made a really good mess inside, done a fair bit of damage. Like, it's our busiest time of year as well, so yeah, really, really sad at this time of year.
Don't abandon these people. Yes, there's going to be some damage, but please continue on with your holidays. Do not cancel what's happening in North Queensland. They need you now more than ever. Now, as we march our way through about a quarter of the 21st century, as we fastly say goodbye to 2023, remember what we were promised of this, the greatest technological century of all time. The Jetsons, of course, told us we'd have flying cars. They also told us you just press a button and something would spit out your food. Remember in Back to the Future, there'd be hovercraft airboards or skateboards with no wheels.
He's on a hoverboard! Get it,
And if that feels a little awkward for what the future was going to look like, this was the BBC back in 1987 saying what they thought the 21st century would be like.
Greetings, 20th century people. I'm wearing part of the gear of the future. Well, it may look like today's, but it's not what it seems. The suit is chemically treated to make it thermosensitive. It absorbs heat when you're hot, thus cooling you down, and releases it again when you're cold, so you maintain a constant temperature. Well, I don't have much in my pockets. A few smart cards, holograms of my family, and we've finally solved the problem of lost keys. Don't have any in the first place. Each unique fingertip opens all the different doors in my life when I press them against pattern recognition pads.
Some of that was actually correct about smart cards and the fact that a lot of people these days have got the little finger pad things to open up doors. The suit, not quite. And also one of their predictions was that there was going to be a special chip that would be in your mouth that where you'd be able to work out whether you're sick or not, and your tie would tell you because it would change colour. But that was their predictions for what we were supposed to get. But here we are, the end of 2023, in the 21st century, and what do we got? Well, no hovercrafts, no hoverboards, no hover cars, instead just the same old traffic jams. The best technology we've got when it comes to a computer producing your food is you do order it on a phone and then somebody hops on a bike and rides it to you. And when it comes to hot days, like inevitably there will always be, because there's this thing called summer and this thing called winter. La Nina, El Nino means these things become a little more intense. Well, guess what happened today in New South Wales when things were particularly warm? Into the 21st century, people were being told not to use their dishwashers this afternoon because that power usage may well have ruined electricity for everyone. If you had an air conditioner, they told you not to turn it on either, and you had to wait till 9 o'clock before you could start to turn on your fan. Yeah, 21st century Australia, where the local energy minister says things like this.
There has been an indication from AEMO that this afternoon, between about 5 and 9 p.m, there's going to be some peak demand, and there are some concerns about the amount of reserve that we have. We are asking, households and businesses to think about what they can defer between 5 and 9 o'clock tonight. So if you can turn your air conditioning up a little bit over about 24 is fantastic. If you can make sure that you don't use your dryers or your dishwashers or your pool pumps between sort of 5 and 9 p.m. tonight, that will all help. If you need to have your Christmas lights on, we'd really love that. If you need to have them on tonight between 5 and 9, if you don't need to, that's fine. Every small bit of action that we take will make it much easier to make sure that the grid stays on and there's not a problem. No one's forced to do any of this. We're just simply saying when you go home tonight, if you don't need to use your dryer or you don't need to put your dishwasher on until tomorrow morning, just please do that.
I mean, what a lovely temperature 24 degrees would be when it comes to your family trying to cool down after a day that was in the high 30s. Do you think any of that happened in the public service today? No, of course not. This is the absurdity of where we are, as green ideology means we've gone from an electricity system that works to one that doesn't work yet, and of course you're paying through the nose, which brings us to another prediction of our future.
Reducing power prices by $275.
By 2025, $275 a year.
$275 a year.
We'll get power prices down by $275 a year.
But of course, just like those technology ones, they had their fingers crossed and it didn't really matter. But of course, it's not the first time that somebody's made a big promise and we're still yet to see it.
By 1990, no Australian child will be living in poverty.
Well, a similar promise that apparently goes into the same bucket as the special suit that'll cool you off or heat you up, the hoverboard or the Jetsons car, was of course that the cost of living was going to be coming down by now. You see, 18 months ago, Australians were asked to vote for a government that promised to do exactly that. A Labor government will lower the cost of living. Yet, as we know, every emergency, every night, every week, every month we've talked about, every piece of information that tells us you are paying more by the day. Which brings us again to the reality for people who, at this time of year, are going to find it very difficult to have the Christmas they had last year or even the year before. Cost of living, of course, is a phenomenal problem for Australians. It's not a problem for the front end of the plane or the private jets that these people fly around in, including with their dogs, but it's national security, so we can't officially know. These people, that being politicians, they got their highest pay rise in 10 years this year, as did the public service. So, of course, they don't experience the same things that we do. And today, I'm sad to say that there is another example of how people are going to be hurting this Christmas who weren't hurting last Christmas. People who have jobs but are hurting this Christmas. The Herald Sun had a story today that 1 in 3 people are skipping meals to save money. Now, this comes from 2 bits of information, and one that particularly comes from an organisation called Second Bite. This is a group of people who try to take food that other people don't want and redistribute it to the people who desperately need it. The current cost of living crisis means Christmas will be a struggle for many Australians as parents and pet owners frequently skip meals to make ends meet, despite a staggering 7.6 billion kilos of food that we throw out every year. Now, I know there's Oz Harvest, but I want to focus in on Second Bite. This is, again, an organisation that is trying to take what other people would want to throw away and give it to the people who desperately need it. Second Bite, which is a national food rescue and redistribution charity, has conducted research, and it found that 90% of parents who use their service are skipping meals so their children don't go hungry. 85% of pet owners say they would rather not eat themselves so their pets can eat. And families are still to this day being forced to choose between food and medicines or rent or mortgage payments. More research that's been done on this shows that 48% of Australians skipped at least one meal due to economic hardship. That is the reality for too many people going into Christmas. Now, many of us will, of course, be looking forward to a very big day of family and a time where we spend lots of time around friends. And I know that I've told stories almost every week on this show about people who are doing it tough. But I'd like you to help us out, because tonight I want to try to show the places you can donate some money to tonight, or maybe your family could donate some money to in lieu of that extra present that is nice to open, but you don't really need it. If you'd like to help out Second Bite and what they are doing, you go to their website, secondbite, or one word, .org. Food Bank. Remember, they tell us that 3.7 million Australians have struggled to put food on the table this year. Their website is foodbank.org.au. We spoke to a great charity that is run out of Melbourne but has locations all over the country called Turbans for Australia. Now, these are people who are literally offering free food to people and they're lining up around the block. And then there's the people from Drought Angels that we spoke to a little bit earlier in the week. These were the people who lost about $250,000 worth of donations that had been given to them because somebody stole a truck. Now, very kindly, about $6,000 worth of donations came in after our interview last week. But I want to leave all these things up on the screen for you to write some names down. Now, you have been remarkable and so generous on everything that we've mentioned on the show that needs some help. So if you're tapped out, I get it. But to the person who maybe didn't help us out with Humpty Dumpty, maybe hasn't helped in other ways and maybe is thinking of that present to give to the person who has already kind of got everything, we'll give a donation in their name to Second Bite, to Food Bank, to Turbans for Australia or to Drought Angels. Give to one, give to all, but please support people who are taking care of the people that are really doing it tough while the politicians pretend that they care, because they don't. Which brings us to the example of the Treasurer. Despite telling us for 363 days that the central focus of this government was about doing something on cost of living, all of those people are still going to suffer this Christmas. You see, the other 2 days were the days where the federal budget is released in May and then the mid-year economic statement is released at the end of the year. And it's all giggles because they've got an awful lot of taxation that's swirling around at the moment. And you see, it's great for the government because if the government's running a surplus, then they can go to an election saying, how good are we at managing the economy? An economy that, by the way, apparently has that many people who are struggling for food this Christmas. But the arrogance of these people thinking it's all about politics and all they need to appeal to is the Teal voters to keep not voting Liberal and the Greens' preferences, and even if their primary vote falls to even lower than the early 30s, they will win the next election. Well, I think humanity means an awful lot more than that, but still, the reviews are in, and a second surplus probably will be achieved by this government. Now, when I say achieved, come on, they haven't done anything. As I told you last night, the $10 billion worth of cuts that they were making to apparently help with inflation, most of it was delaying projects off into the never-never. Labor is on track to deliver its second surplus thanks to, again, those changes when it comes to infrastructure cuts and higher personal income tax. Now, we had a conversation last night with Joe Hildebrand and Bronwyn Bishop, and so many people watched it around the country. Thank you for your support all the way through towards the early days of summer. I do appreciate it. About just how many people are paying tax. Well, I'll give you the tip. More people than ever before are paying tax, and the single greatest source of revenue to the Australian government is you. It's not company tax, it's not GST. According to the very numbers from the mid-year economic review, let's have a look here. The difference between what they suggested in May and what has been delivered now, the pay-as-you-go taxpayer, the average person, $336 billion. That is up $17 billion in just a few months. Company tax was $140 billion. That's up the best part of $8 billion. And if you think the GST is a huge source of money, of course, all of that ends up going to the state governments, but that is just $88 billion. It is just a fraction of the income tax that ends up funding the entire system. Remember, a system where 35% of the entire spending of the federal budget is on, among other things, actually not among other things, only on welfare. And just in case you would like to be reminded with some data of what we talked about last night, which is the trend. And yes, a bigger population equals more revenue for governments because more people end up getting jobs. But have a look at the overall taxation figure that has been put together over the past few years. In the last year of the Morrison government, it was $550 billion. First half of the shared year, half Morrison, half Labor, 618. This financial year, it's $649 billion, and we're not even halfway through. The expectations for the next year will be up again to $674 billion. And then in 2026-27, the federal government will be getting $716 billion. Now, if only we had examples of people who are currently running the system looking forward to more than $700 billion worth of taxation revenue who were blowing a gasket when it was just $500 billion.
It is now the second highest taxing government in Australian recent history. The second highest taxing government in Australian political history.
The second highest taxing government in the last 30 years.
Our highest taxing government in modern Australian economic history.
Second highest taxing government of the last 30 years.
Well, guess who's now got the gold medal? The very people who told you vote for them and everything would be cheaper. It hasn't been. When it comes to paying off your house, anywhere from people with $500,000 loans all the way through to $1 million loans, it could be anywhere between an extra $15,000 to $30,000 a year in paying off your home. More people homeless than ever before in the country, despite, of course, the promises about kids and poverty back in the 1990s, let alone the cost of everything, particularly things when you go to get food, which now means that people are going to be lining up around the block this Christmas with no help from the federal government, no money extra sent from the surplus, no cracking off of $1 billion and sending it to the charity sector to make sure that those people who would rather feed their pets than feed themselves will get any assistance this Christmas. Yet, of course, because the extreme majority of people who talk about politics for a living desperately want to find a way to tell us that this government is bouncing back from its apparent near-death experience towards the end of the year. Nobody wants to hold these people accountable for the promises that they have made and the promises that they have not delivered. Your power is more expensive. Paying off your home is more expensive. Getting things from the supermarket is more expensive. Turning on the lights, if they work, depending on whether it's a hot day or not, is more expensive. And government is responsible for all of those settings. Welcome to the world of albonomics. Now, I can't pretend that there wasn't good news in terms of the number of people who have jobs, which of course means more tax, which means they get to become the highest taxing government of all time. In the past month, 57,000 people got a full-time job. That's good news. 4,500 people got a part-time job. But what that also means is an awful lot of people are now starting to look for work, which means the unemployment rate is at an 18-month high of 3.9%. The expectations in the mid-year economic review is that it'll have a 4 in front of it, and maybe another 110,000 people could end up losing their jobs. But, you know, whatever. Little people. Who cares, right? Not these people. They've got puppies to fly on planes. National security. Now, remember the very disruptive protests which have, among other things, closed Sydney's Harbour Bridge and also shut down a whole collection of ports and railways of recent years? Well, the New South Wales government at the time, with the support of the Labor Party, which is now the government, tried to pass some laws, in fact passed some laws, to go specifically after these people to hold them to greater account for the disruption of daily life. Because these people, of course, are, in my view, all part of some sort of doomsday cult that believes we're not panicked enough about climate change, so therefore everyone's life must be disrupted. From the people who are going to work or the people who are trying to visit their families in hospital. All of that is secondary to the morality of these people. Now, these laws, of course, have been challenged by protesters for some time.
Unlikely plaintiffs.
I feel as an older person it's my duty to stand up and protect our freedom to protest.
Taking their fight to the Supreme Court.
This attack on our democratic freedoms is a slap in the face.
The Knitting Nanas suing the state government over new protest penalties of $22,000, 2 years in jail, or both, claiming the laws are unconstitutional.
It's a right worth protecting and fighting for.
And guess what the Supreme Court of New South Wales, which also got a pay rise this year, decided today? That the laws are unconstitutional. Now, there's no expectation to bring Parliament back to find new laws here, but it now means expect a summer of disruption because you're not as scared about climate change as some of these people are. Here's the New South Wales Premier's reaction today.
Can I just cycle all the way back to the reason for these laws being in place and why Labor supported them? People were doing, frankly, stupid things, putting themselves in extreme danger to make what they term political protests, hanging from cranes that were located on top of railway lines, chaining themselves to roads with heavy vehicles operating in the vicinity. It would only take a split second for a worker not to see a protester lying on the ground, for example, to see a tragedy take place. And that would be terrible for the protester. It would be terrible for the worker on a port or in a forest or in another part of New South Wales. And it's putting emergency service workers' lives at risk as a result of these protests. I'm not going to remove or strike down or remove in a legislative sense the existing laws. They're important for protecting lives in New South Wales.
So what will happen is they will go to the full bench of the Supreme Court, and then if they need to go to the High Court, we'll all wait and see where it goes. But right now the laws currently have to be suspended because it is waiting the challenge. Unbelievable. Meantime, obviously, bushfires are going to be part of the picture of summer because they're the part of the picture of every summer. We also know that the difference between the El Niño and La Niña is that the drier summers are going to be drier, and obviously climate change is part of that. But one thing that absolutely never gets discussed is, of course, there are bushfires that are deliberately lit. That's why there's an arson squad that literally has a name of people who set off bushfires. And then there's the other part that, of course, you can't possibly talk about. So I thought I should talk about it before. Inevitably, there's fires, and we'll be dealing with this when we come back in a few weeks' time. Hazard reduction. Now, hazard reduction, of course, is a vital part in robbing potential bushfires of stuff to burn. Quite obviously, in the years when there's lots of rain, there's lots of crap that starts to grow up, there's lots of stuff that starts to fall over, and it needs to be cleaned out. But thanks to the great reporting of Jonathan Lee and the investigative team here at Sky News, working in conjunction, of course, with the Daily Telegraph, they have sadly reported that New South Wales ain't ready. In fact, if you have a look after the black summer bushfires, yeah, they got on with it. There was meant to be 220,000 hectares that were dealt with hazard reduction. Well, when everyone was paying attention, they got it done. And then the following year, in 2021 to 2022, they got 70% of what needed to be done was done. But you notice the target of 64,000 is a whole lot less than the year before, which was 220,000. And then in the year 2022-23, it wasn't even 30%. They were supposed to get rid of 320,000 hectares. They only got 90,000 hectares. And this year, of the 324,000 hectares that needed to be cleared, they've only done 50,000 hectares. Now, they will turn around and say there weren't enough people, there wasn't enough right days to burn, but still, the reality is New South Wales is not ready for what will inevitably be a bad bushfire season. Here's part of what Jono has said. You can find his full reports at skynews.com.au.
This area is a case in point. In 2019, it was surrounded by fire. Somehow it was spared. Locals tell us it was supposed to have a hazard reduction burn in September. But for whatever reason, that hasn't happened, only putting these houses at greater risk. Sky News has seen a secret RFS document outlining hazard reduction burns for the flammable Hawkesbury region. It shows the 6 most dangerous threats rated extreme are all still to be done, with one seemingly waiting 8 years. Many others rated very high are also untouched.
Now, the Rural Fire Service has got the money, it's got the manpower. Now, whether they had every possible day, well, that's obviously up to them, but they are way behind. The idea that an area has not been done for 8 years Now, they will come down on us like a ton of bricks and say that it's misinformation. And, of course, if the federal government's able to censor the internet, you wouldn't be able to hear stories like this. But thankfully, that law doesn't exist, which means we can tell you what they don't want you to know. They're not ready. Now, to the volunteers, I'm not blaming you. To the brass, yep, you haven't done your job. Now, let's talk about what's been happening, of course, with Cyclone Jasper up and around North Queensland. And Michael Kerr is the Mayor of Port Douglas. Cairns, thankfully, has been let off the hook. But, Mr Mayor, we were talking last night. We didn't know exactly what was going to be happening to your part of the world. So what happened to your part of the world in the past 24 hours?
Well, certainly a lot of wind and a lot of rain as well. So had lots of big gusts of wind. The eye of the cyclone passed just north of Port Douglas through Cape Tribulation, which brought a lot of tree damage, especially to this region here. We've lost some massive trees throughout the whole region. There's a lot of debris still out on the roads. And, of course, a lot of rain hit the Mossman and north of Douglas areas. So we've had a fair bit of flooding there with the Mossman River breaking its banks and having to evacuate some people through Mossman near the river there, and even had to do a rescue last night of 14 people who were stuck on a rooftop. So big thanks to the Queensland Fire and Rescue for that.
Now, give me an idea about the Mossman River and the number of properties that we're talking about here that have been affected. Obviously, your council area doesn't cover all of it, but tell me how many properties have been affected there by the flooding?
Well, the Mossman River goes through our main CBD area. There's about 40 houses that were affected. They all were given evacuations at their own risk. And about 18 of them we found accommodation for. The rest all managed to find accommodation within friends and family. At this stage, it's just a watch and look. We're expecting a lot more rain to come through tonight, and of course a high tide again tomorrow morning, which could cause some problems there, and also the Daintree River as well. Yeah, you've given me a preview of the next couple of days, but tell me what the plan is when eventually you're able to do some work at low tide. What is the council doing to make sure that those areas that are flood affected? Obviously, you're working with the state authorities, but what's happening to help the people who are going to be in the eye of the rain in the next little while? Well, all those people have been moved on. They've been given that evacuation. They've all been given some great food and beverages last night to look after them in dry conditions. And also, that area there, it's only a small community. It's a small group of people that have been affected. And, we've certainly made sure they've been well looked after and they're safe. And that's been the whole thing, is making sure people are safe through this.
Is there a strange sense of relief, Mayor? Because obviously, this is bad. There's no question about it. The flooded properties, we're not minimising that. Issues when it comes to some of the local shops. But we all know that when something like a cyclone's around, we could be talking about injuries or people that have passed away. Now, obviously, we haven't accounted for every single potential property. But is there a slight sense of relief compared to what you were looking at the start of the week?
Absolutely there is. We've, especially with Port Douglas, a lot of the low-lying areas and Wonga, Kuya, these areas could have been greatly affected if we'd had those high tides at the same time as the inundation from the winds coming in. That didn't happen, so we were reprieved of all that sort of stuff, thank goodness. It's all just been wind damage rather than water damage for most of the area. It's only been small portions that have been hit by this flooding, which we're looking after now.
Well, Michael, thank you for being as available as you have been to us and how supportive you and the council are for the local area. Good on you, mate. Good man. Thank you. Good on you, Michael. All right. In a moment's time, get ready for the best debate of the week. Kroger versus Conroy. There's no cricket on, and well done. Well done to David Warner. Well done. Didn't he absolutely rip him apart today? Well, there's no cricket, so the best game in town is coming up next. We're in the 21st century. We're rationing power. And what do they think with their political brains about the three things that both Albo and Dutton need to do to get the best start possible next year? Plus, winners and losers of the year, bowl prediction. We're just getting started. It's a fun one. Get ready. Thursday night on Paul Murray Live. Thanks for watching. How good's this? A little Chrissy present for you. Kroger versus Conroy. Everyone's just here to help. And just getting in the theme of the first cricket test, Michael Kroger's still got his whites on from playing in the nets a bit earlier today. It's summer in Melbourne, but hello, my friend. And of course, Stephen Conroy's just here to help.
Freezing.
Now, I've got a little feeling that Stephen, you're going to be a secret sort of Christmas crooners kind of guy. Like, do you bore the family with a certain playlist for weeks and weeks in advance, or are you somebody who just likes just Mariah Carey and that's it?
No, look, I'm not actually a big fan of the Mariah Carey song. There's lots of other Christmas songs No, look, I probably hear it too often for me to truly embrace it.
So I feel about Albo's speeches.
I've got a few. I've got a few that I don't mind on rotation, but no, I'm not a big Christmas crooner.
All right,
now is the best way to answer it.
We'll get it out of the way. What about you? Michael? Have you got the LPs from your childhood that are ringing through the house, or you're a Spotify man? What do you do?
No, as I've moved, I've lost all my vinyl records. No, we're going to play. No, I know, mate, but we've got something better. Got something better than Elvis Presley's "Suspicious Minds" and his great album "That's the Way It Is" from 1970. But no, I've got something better, which is Albo's greatest hits from the Voice campaign. We're going to run his whole thing. It's going to be great. Goes for an hour. Yeah. Great. A bit of Marcia Langton in there and Megan Davis. A bit of racism. You mugs out there. Yeah. All of that. So it's going to be great. Goes for an hour.
Now, what you're hearing here, these bells are
high
part
five.
Of the misinformation bells. The misinformation bills. High five. Get
High
rid of
Five's
it.
Christmas album.
All right. He played it. I'm not paying for it. Okay. Let's get to it. We're in the 21st century. We're 23 years into the 21st century, and the New South Wales government told people today to turn off their washing machines, turn up their air conditioning because the power might not work. Michael, this is ridiculous. Power costs more than ever before, but please don't use it.
No, you're confused, mate. The power bills are coming down by $275.
Yeah, sorry, that's right.
They're coming down. So if you've got a bill for a large amount, it's a misprint. Basically, what's happened is this, mate. Chris Bowen has lost control of the whole debate. This country has gone too fast into renewables, too quickly to close coal-fired power stations. The electorate is totally confused because Bowen's been telling them for years. Cheaper. Everything's going to be cheaper with renewables. It seems that everything's gone through the roof, and the electorate have now decided what's happening isn't working. The whole energy transition has been a total debacle. And of course, in Queensland for years they've been saying, please don't put on your air conditioner between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. because it'll blow the grid. So in an energy-rich country like this, what an utter, absolute farce.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen, it does feel like we're going 1,000 miles an hour towards the wrong destination, 1,000 knots an hour, dare I say.
I mean, it's just tragic for Michael that all those power stations are closed under the Liberal government's policies. But let's not worry about, just a simple fact like
they
closed
state government
under the federal Liberal Party. And the only party that's actually said, no, we're not going to close one is Chris Minns, to his credit, who said, no, we're going to have to keep that coal-fired power station going for a while longer. So under the Liberals, lots closed, they did nothing. Under Labor, Chris Minns, he's keeping one open that said it was going to close. So I don't want to put any facts in front of the audience there to get in Michael's way.
And Daniel Andrews didn't close Hazelwood. No,
but hang on. But then also, isn't Chris Bowen also going to spend $60 billion off budget for 32 gig of renewable power? But that'll all be commercial in confidence, so we don't know about how much money this government's going to spend on the next sources of energy, Stephen.
Well, look, there's two separate points there. First is the policy initiative is very sound. I mean, we need to be able to store the renewable energy. We've got the solar panels, we've got the windmills, and we need to be able to store it so we can use it at the best time. In South Australia, built a battery to try and take the edge off the outrageous price gouging that energy companies were engaged in a couple of years ago.
Then it's got an extension called
now
the Victoria.
We've got a proposal which was they built. Remember Elon Musk? He came and actually did something useful apart from destroy Twitter/X. And then you've got a different argument about, it's some secrets. Every single serious, significant federal government expenditure on an individual project like that, whether it's a Labor or Liberal, you don't state up front what the cost will be, because all that does is encourage companies to bid more. If they bid more, you need the cheapest price. You tell them what your price is, guess what they'll all bid? The top price. Yeah. So your criticism of the secrecy is a criticism that applies to both sides because it's actually smart business.
It's going well.
Yeah, OK. But again, just one more time. Can we just see Penny Sharp? Remember, the Jetsons. Remember the Jetsons? We were supposed to have, you could press a button. Not that it was a documentary, but you get my point. You push a button and all the food comes out of the machine, the hovercrafts and all the rest of it. We saw the BBC with its technology. This was a government minister today in Sydney.
Every small bit of action that we take will make it much easier to make sure that the grid stays on and there's not a problem. No one's forced to do any of this. We're just simply saying, when you go home tonight, if you don't need to use your dryer or you don't need to put your dishwasher on until tomorrow morning, just please do that.
I love when Stephen has to argue that a bad idea is a good idea. But he's loyal. He's loyal to it.
6 months?
Sorry,
he's
go
loyal.
for it.
He's loyal.
But 6 months in government and it's all their fault in New South Wales.
No, Matt Keane. No, mate.
No, it's going
when
well.
Matt Keane did it, when Matt Keane did it a year ago, I tore him a new one as well. Anyway, let's talk about the decision.
I'm just pointing out that it was Matt Keane and the Liberal Party in New South Wales that did it.
Mate, don't
been
worry.
A great success.
You're going to get a free kick at goal when you say Matt Keane or the Ghost and the failures of their public policy. All right. Now let's talk here. Let's talk about where the federal government landed on this ceasefire motion. Now, of course, as I pointed out last night, the full text of the ceasefire message does say that the hostages have to be released. However, it does not say that Hamas has to relinquish control as the governing body of Gaza, none of that whatsoever. But as you know, the reaction has been quite firm. Julian Leeser, a Jewish man, but a federal MP, said this a bit earlier about the government's decision.
A ceasefire only legitimises Hamas. A ceasefire only gives Hamas time in order to increase its activities in Gaza. What we want to see is Hamas moved out of Gaza. The only way to do that is to allow Israel to get on with its operations.
Michael, it feels like they're not playing 4D chess here. They're playing checkers, and they're playing checkers with the left wing of their own party.
So what's happened here is you've seen a discernible shift in the policy position of the Labor government. Bob Hawke would be turning in his grave if he was observing these events. He would be absolutely appalled at what Wong is doing with Albanese. This is a hard left, extreme left Labor government deserting Israel, calling for a ceasefire. For what purpose? OK, medical aid comes in. We've had that. We've actually had a few ceasefires, as we know, in the last week or so. No, as Lisa says, and as every right-thinking person in the world knows, this is a clash of civilisations. This is a fight for the civilised world, and there can only be one outcome, which the Israeli government is pursuing, which is to defeat Hamas, to kill or capture the leaders of Hamas, Sinwar and Day, and then to have arrested or eliminate their leaders in other countries. This is a terrorist organisation, no different in shape or form from Al-Qaeda. They are the worst excesses of the modern world. But typically, of course, in the West, the soft belly of the West can last about 3 weeks, and then they get tired. So we support Ukraine, and then unfortunately Trump, he's decided no, he's a bit bored with that. Now he wants to move on to something else. The concentration span of the West for hard decisions is a very short one, and thank goodness for Netanyahu and the Israeli government. Biden has been fantastic during this process. He didn't tell the Israelis to hurry up, by the way, and shame on Albanese, shame on Wong. Disgraceful decisions by them. And as I said, Bob Hawke would look at this government and think, this is not my party any longer.
Stephen, I mentioned this last night, and I know it'll go down like a lead balloon with some, but still, this is not a comment on the people who served our country, but it is a comment on where our country has been and where our governments have been for the past 20 years. In Iraq and Afghanistan, the best part of 300,000 civilians were killed over a 20-year period. There was no such movement or change in posture from the Australian government. Why a change in posture in relation to Israel trying to do what the United States and us in coalition did for 20 years?
Well, look, firstly, it won't surprise you, Paul, that I wouldn't have voted for that resolution.
Good man.
I think there's a number of things Michael said that I do want to contest and contest strongly. I mean, Penny Wong was vilified just a few weeks ago for suggesting there should be a ceasefire or the steps towards a ceasefire. A week later, Netanyahu announces a ceasefire. Michael doesn't say anything. You know, no one jumps on Netanyahu.
To get hostages out.
So Penny was talking about getting the hostages out, just as Labor today talked about getting the hostages out.
Well, what about the getting rid of Hamas bit?
Yeah, well, but look, I believe, you know, in the tooth fairy as well. I mean, let me give you a hint, BB. They're in Qatar.
Yes, good point.
Go get them.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be very clear. There is no serious senior leaders of Hamas left in Gaza unless they're incredibly stupid. And they're not. They're quite clever people. They're hiding in Qatar. So you want to get them, you want to hunt them down, and I'm all for that. Go get them in Qatar. So let's stop this pretense. I'm a lifelong supporter of the State of Israel. I'm a lifelong supporter of the two-state solution. But what Bibi is engaged in is trying to protect his own arse yet again. He has completely stuffed this up. He knows he is gone. He is gone once the conflict is over.
100%.
So he makes some nonsensical statement like, we want to eradicate Hamas. It took the combined might of the Western world 10 years to track down Osama bin Laden, who was living in plain sight in Pakistan. This idea that I'm going to keep going until we've wiped them out. Now, I'm all for wiping them out and making them pay for what they did on the 7th. That was barbaric and disgusting. But he is setting up a whole series of, you know, here's how we win when they're not achievable. And who's he ultimately going to negotiate with over whenever the end is reached, the settlement is reached? The Qatari government and the Hamas leadership. So stop pretending that he's going to be getting rid of the Hamas leadership. What he's doing is posturing for his own political ends. And while I absolutely stand by the State of Israel and abhor what Hamas did, let's stop pretending that Bibi is involved in this incredible fight for the Western civilization. He's about saving his ass as the Prime Minister of Israel.
Well, that's just a gross overstatement, Stephen. He's the Prime Minister of Israel. Yeah, of course, what happened on October 7 was a massive intelligence failure by the Israelis. We all know that. He knows that. Everyone in Israel knows that. Everyone in the world knows that. But, of course, he's doing what his duty is, which is to fight for the State of Israel. And I think he's done the right thing. And there's absolutely no doubt that they have to hunt down and kill the Hamas leaders. You know,
they're in Qatar.
But Deif and Sinwar are still.
Go get them.
No, they're not. No. Sinwar is in.
In Gaza.
He's in Gaza. He's in Gaza. Well, he's not. Everyone knows Sinwar's in Gaza, and Mohammed Deif's in Gaza too. And I would think in the next 2 to 3 weeks that will be confirmed.
Well, we'll all wait and see. We'll all see it over the next little while. Certainly, look, you've got to, as always, there's a million currents running in all of this. But certainly, we've got to remember as well, with 20 years, the entire might of the Western world in Afghanistan. Remember, that was about ridding the Taliban. We ended up handing it back to the Taliban. So we all know where the stakes are, and we all know that what can actually be achieved versus what needs to be achieved. All right, lads, stick where you are, because I want to talk about next year. I want to talk about what Albo needs to do to have a good start next year and what Dutton needs to do to have a good start next year. But guess what? It won't be who you think advocating for who has to have a better start next year. We'll be role reversing next here on Paul Murray Live. All right, now we're going to be here on Sunday night as well, so it's not our last debate of the year, but it's our last chance to have a chat to Michael Kroger and to Stephen Conroy. Team Red, Team Blue, let's go old school here for our final run this week. Now, lads, I want some free advice here to the people who you would love to not have a great start to next year. So I'll start with you first, Stephen. Now, you're giving advice to Peter Dutton. How does he get a good start in 2024?
Well, I think he's ended the year strongly, no question. He's got a spring in his step. If you're watching physically, that last week of Parliament, he's out of the funk that he was probably in, 12 months ago. Once you've lost,
he's got the swagger.
It's a pretty depressing. Yeah, he's got the swagger back, but he actually has to do more than just be negative. Now, having said that, Tony Abbott succeeded, and I'm not being critical. This was a genius political campaign. What he decided to do. Tony Abbott was to force Labor, by voting against things that are even 2/3 reasonable to the Liberal Party, he forced Labor into arguments and getting support from, the Greens and the fringe dwellers in the Parliament, and that meant that Labor were forced to take positions that weren't more centrist or a little bit more left. Ultimately, that's a short-term win, but it turned out to be a long-term loss for Abbott because he then blew himself up inside 18 months. I mean, that strategy can have a short-term political win. So what Dutton needs to do is have more substance. What Dutton's got to do is get some policies out there that, he can stand by and campaign for. 3 to 5 is all he needs to develop over the next 18 months. But it's going to be hard because when he starts talking about cutbacks in here and we'll spend less here, he happens much to that scare campaign. So he's got to find a way to get support behind policies that can't be attacked for being, economically irresponsible.
All right. The reverse, free advice to Anthony Albanese from a man who hopes he fails, none other than Michael Kroger. Go.
Well, mate, he needs a reshuffle. He needs to remove Giles. He needs to remove O'Neill, and he needs to remove Penny Wong. And Linda Burney needs to retire. So Wong and Burney needs to retire. He needs to put Richard Marles into Foreign Affairs to calm the waters, because Wong is too extreme on Israel, and she's a member of the hard socialist left, as Albanese is. He needs to bring this government back to the centre more. He needs to move Bowen out and have someone more rational, not a zealot in the climate change, global warming portfolio. He needs to stop on his natural tendencies, which are these extreme left policies. He needs to bury the Makarrata Commission, treaties, reparations, all of those things, and with a more moderate promote people like Don Farrell, the more sensible middle Labor right figures, to give the impression that this Labor government is for the working middle class, because the minute people think this government is completely out of control, and Albanese needs to step back in and take control, because you don't get any sense at the minute that this guy's in charge of the government. No. You've got Bowen out there on a wing, you've got Giles, you've got O'Neill, you've got Dreyfus. No one seems to be running, Albert doesn't seem to be running this government, mate.
I'm with you completely. All right, but I want to give you some time to give me winner or loser of the year. You've both got about 15 seconds to do it, so let's go fast. Stephen Conroy, winner loser this year.
Look, I think Jim Chalmers put the budget back in the black after 9 years of failed attempts by the Liberals. I think he's the big winner.
I love you. All right, none of that. Oh, please. All right, Michael Kroger.
Yeah, well, apart from the fact that it's the first budget surplus since Josh in 2019, and apart from the fact that he's increasing expenditure as a percentage of GDP from 24.5% to 26%, the winner is Peter Dutton, the silver medal to Jacinta Price and Warren Mundine, and the loser of the year, Albo and overseas, those disgraceful heads of those 3 Ivy League universities, one of whom's gone and the other 2 should go. I
think the winners of the year are the Matildas, well and truly. All right, thank you very much, lads. I do appreciate it. Merry Christmas to you both.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you for all the fight on the on and off the air, and Merry Christmas. Love you guys. All right, quick break. Back with more here on Paul Murray Live. Final thought for the week. Remember, tell us who you think is the winner or loser of the week. Send me an email, paul@skynews.com.au. Don't forget, back on Sunday night. There is an Australian Christmas tradition that apparently is going by the wayside. We need to bring it back. According to local garbos, people are not leaving a 60 for the people who pick up one of 28 bins. Change this. Change it now. If you've got somebody who takes care of your pool, somebody who mows the lawn, whatever it is, you need to offer them a 6-pack. Now, I remember when my dad, my brother as well, were inundated with it. And also, if they end up with all of that free booze, it's free gifts they can give to other people. So give to a Garbo so the Garbo can give to somebody else. See you Sunday night. Here's a late debate.